The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness like a metal city among the stars. Ships from dozens of alien worlds docked at its ports every day, bringing trade and news from across the galaxy. The station had been the center of galactic power for over 3,000 years, ruled by the Vorthak Empire and their cold reptilian masters. Kim Tae-ho stood at the window of the human diplomatic shuttle as it approached the station. He was Earth's first ambassador to the galaxy, a role nobody had wanted until now. Behind him, his small team of humans prepared for what might be the most important meeting in their species' history. They all knew the stories about what happened to primitive races that caught the attention of the galactic powers. The shuttle bay doors opened with a hiss, and immediately Tae-ho could smell the strange mix of alien atmospheres that filled the station. The air was thick and warm, designed to suit the Vorthak who controlled everything here. As the human delegation stepped out, they saw their first aliens up close. The Vorthak guards were tall and covered in dark green scales. Their yellow eyes looked at the humans like they were looking at insects. One of them spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding stone, using the translation device all visitors had to wear. "Follow the path to Council Chamber 7, the guard said. "Do not touch anything. Do not speak to other species. Do not cause trouble." Park Ji-woo, the team's scientist, watched everything with careful eyes as they walked through the station's corridors. She saw small insect-like creatures called Klaxi scrubbing the floors with 6 arms each, their compound eyes never looking up from their work. In one section, blue-skinned aquatic beings called Nereids swam in glass tubes, apparently being used to filter the station's water systems. "They are slaves," Ji-woo whispered to Lee Da-eun, the military advisor walking beside her. "I see it," Da-eun replied quietly. Her trained soldier's mind was already noting the station's layout, the guard positions, and the way the alien hierarchy worked. The Vorthak were on top, a few other species served as administrators and technicians in the middle, and everyone else was property. The council chamber was enormous, with a high ceiling that disappeared into shadows. Dozens of different alien species sat in tiered seats around a central platform. The humans were directed to a small section marked for minor species near the back. As they took their seats, Tae-ho heard the other aliens making sounds that the translator identified as laughter. "Look at the new mammals," one voice said. "They still have hair on their heads," said another. "How primitive," added a third. The laughter grew louder until a deep roar silenced the chamber. Supreme Chancellor Vexitar had arrived. The massive Vorthak leader was twice the size of his guards, with scars covering his scales and metal implants, where his left eye used to be. When he spoke, every other creature in the room became silent. "We have new petitioners today," Vexitar announced, his voice carrying easily through the huge chamber. "The species called humans from the world they name Earth. They request protection under galactic law and recognition as a sentient race." More laughter filled the chamber. Vexitar raised one clawed hand for silence. "Ambassador of humans, approach and state your case." Tae-ho walked down to the central platform, trying to ignore the hundreds of alien eyes watching his every move. He had practiced this speech 1,000 times, but standing here under the gaze of beings who could destroy his entire world made his mouth feel dry. "Honorable Chancellor," he began, "humanity seeks only peaceful contact with the galaxy. We offer our friendship, our knowledge, and our willingness to contribute to galactic civilization. We ask for protection under the laws that govern all sentient beings." Vexitar leaned forward on his massive throne. "And what makes you believe you qualify for such protection, mammal? Your species has barely left its birth world. Your technology is crude metal and chemical reactions. Your lifespans are laughably short." "We may be young as a spacefaring race," Tae-ho replied, "but we have learned much in our time. We have art, music, literature. We have built great cities and healed our world's wounds. We have love, friendship, and hope. The laughter that erupted from the chamber was so loud it hurt the humans' ears. Even some of the enslaved species seemed to find humor in Tai-Ho's words. Vexitar's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. Love? Friendship? Hope? The Chancellor repeated mockingly. These are weaknesses, not strengths. The galaxy belongs to those who take it, who hold it with power and fear. Your species shows every sign of being evolutionarily inferior. Da-Un clenched her fists as she watched from the audience. She had seen bullies before, but never on this scale. The Vorthak were not just cruel to humans. They were cruel to everyone they considered beneath them. She noticed how the other species flinched whenever a Vorthak moved too quickly, how they kept their eyes down and their voices quiet. We have made our decision, Vextar continued. Humanity does not qualify for protection under galactic law. Furthermore, your species shows interesting biological characteristics that warrant scientific study. A collection expedition will be dispatched to your world to gather specimens for research. The words hit the human delegation like physical blows. Tai-Ho felt his heart racing as he realized what this meant. They had come seeking friendship and found only predators. How many specimens? Tai-Ho asked, his voice steady despite his fear. As many as needed for a thorough study, Vextar replied casually. Perhaps a few million to start. Your species reproduces quickly, so this should not threaten your survival. Jiwoo stood up from her seat, unable to stay quiet any longer. You cannot just take our people like animals. The chamber fell silent. Several Vorthak guards moved toward the human section, but Vextar raised his hand to stop them. Your scientist speaks with passion, he said, his yellow eyes focusing on Jiwoo. This emotion is exactly why your species is unfit for civilization. Passion leads to chaos. Order requires control. And who controls you? Da-Un asked, also rising from her seat. The question surprised everyone, including the other humans. Vextar's scarred face darkened. I am Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Council. I answer to no one. That means you have never learned to work with others as equals, Da-Un said calmly. You only understand master and slave. That makes you weaker than you think. The tension in the chamber was now thick enough to cut. Other alien delegates shifted nervously in their seats. No one had ever spoken to Vextar this way and lived. Remove them, Vextar growled to his guards. The collection fleet departs for Earth in one standard cycle. This audience is ended. As the Vorthak guards escorted them back to their shuttle, Tai-Ho managed to activate a small communication device hidden in his clothing. Using a code known only to Earth's military, he sent a brief message across the galaxy to his home world. Operation Underdogs is approved, he transmitted. The shuttle carrying the human delegation left Nexus Prime an hour later. As they traveled back toward Earth, the four humans sat in thoughtful silence for a long time. Finally, Jiwoo spoke. They treat intelligence like a disease, she said. They want every species to be afraid and broken. It works because no one fights back, Da-Un observed. The other species have forgotten how to resist. Or maybe they never learned, Tai-Ho added. Humans are different. We have always fought against those who would enslave us. The Vorthak think they know everything about warfare, Da-Un said with a grim smile. But they have never faced an enemy like us. They do not understand what humans will do to protect their families. As their shuttle jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading for Earth and the coming war, none of them knew that representatives from several enslaved species had quietly recorded the human delegation's words. For the first time in thousands of years, someone had stood up to the Vorthak Empire and spoken of hope instead of fear. On worlds across the galaxy, in hidden places where the oppressed gathered to remember better times, alien voices whispered about the strange mammals who had dared to challenge the Supreme Chancellor. Some called it madness, Others called it the first sign that change might be possible. The Vorthak collection fleet would reach Earth in 3 months. When it arrived, they expected to find a primitive world full of helpless victims. Instead, they would discover that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their weapons. It was their absolute refusal to surrender their freedom to anyone. 3 months had passed since the human delegation returned from Nexus Prime with news of the coming invasion. Earth's governments had put aside all their differences to prepare for what everyone knew would be a fight for their species' survival. Every ship that could carry weapons was armed, every person who could fight was trained, and every mind that could think was put to work solving the problem of how to defeat an enemy with technology thousands of years more advanced. Fleet Commander Zephulos stood on the bridge of his flagship as the Vorthak collection fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system. 200 massive dreadnoughts appeared in space, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. Their dark hulls were covered in weapon ports and shield generators that could level entire cities. "Scans complete, Commander," reported his navigation officer. "The target world shows minimal defensive capability. Approximately 50 primitive vessels in orbit, armed with chemical rockets and crude energy weapons." Zephulos examined the tactical display with satisfaction. The human ships were tiny compared to his dreadnoughts, like insects challenging dragons. Their weapons could barely scratch Vorthak armor, and their shields were so weak they might as well not exist. "Begin the collection operation," he ordered. "Disable their vessels, but do not destroy them completely. The Supreme Chancellor wants to study their military tactics as well as their biology." Captain O Min-suk received the enemy's arrival report aboard the human command ship Defiance. Around him, officers from every nation on Earth worked together at their stations. The bridge was cramped and primitive compared to alien technology, but it hummed with determined energy. "All ships report ready, Captain," announced Lieutenant Commander Park Young-min from the communications station. "General Yoon sends her regards and confirms ground forces are in position," added Major Kim Sung-ho from the tactical board. Min-suk nodded and opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All vessels, this is Captain O. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for the right of every thinking being in the galaxy to live free. The enemy expects us to line up like targets in their shooting gallery. Instead, we show them what happens when they threaten our families." The Vorthak fleet moved into attack formation, a perfect geometric arrangement that had conquered 1,000 worlds. Their commander expected the humans to either flee in terror or charge directly at his superior force. Neither option would save them from capture and study. What happened instead had never occurred in 3,000 years of Vorthak military history. The human ships scattered in all directions like a flock of birds startled by a predator. Some dove toward the inner planets, others climbed above the orbital plane, and still others seemed to retreat toward the outer system. There was no pattern, no formation, no apparent strategy at all. "What are they doing?" Zephulos demanded, as his sensors tried to track 50 different targets moving in 50 different directions. "Unknown, Commander," his tactical officer replied. "They appear to be running away." "Then pursue them. Capture as many intact as possible." The Vorthak ships broke formation to chase their scattered prey, confident that their superior speed would make the hunt quick and easy. Commander Bae Sora, flying her modified fighter craft Angel's Wing, watched the massive alien ship spread out and smiled grimly. "Phase 1 complete," she transmitted on the hidden frequency all human ships monitored. "Enemy formation broken. Beginning harassment protocol." What followed was unlike any space battle in galactic history. Instead of standing and fighting, the human ships led their pursuers on wild chases through asteroid fields, around planetary gravity wells, and into the swirling gases of Jupiter's upper atmosphere. Every time a Vorthak ship thought it had cornered its prey, the humans would pull some impossible maneuver that their primitive technology should not have been able to survive. Lieutenant Han Kyung-min guided his converted mining ship Tunnel Rat through a gap between 2 asteroids that was barely wider than his hull. The Vorthak dreadnought following him was too large to fit through the same space and had to go around, losing precious seconds. "These mammals are insane," the alien captain muttered as he watched the human ship pull ahead again. Dr. Choi Woo-bin had spent 3 months working with Earth's brightest scientists to develop new technologies based on what the diplomatic mission had learned about alien systems. Their greatest breakthrough was adaptive shield frequencies that changed constantly, making it nearly impossible for enemy weapons to lock onto a stable target. "Shield rotation at maximum efficiency," reported engineer Nam Ji-hai from her station, aboard the destroyer Soul's Pride. "Enemy fire is scattering like rain on glass." The Vorthak fleet had expected to end the battle in minutes. Instead, they found themselves chasing ghosts through a maze of planets and debris. Worse, the humans had begun to fight back in ways that defied all military logic. Communications specialist Na Yu-jin broadcast on all frequencies as her ship charged directly at a Vorthak cruiser. Her voice carried the fierce joy of someone who had chosen to die fighting rather than live as a slave. For Earth, for freedom, for everyone who ever dared to dream. Her ship, loaded with nuclear explosives, crashed into the alien vessel's side. The explosion tore a massive hole in the enemy's armor and sent debris spinning through space. It was the first Vorthak ship destroyed by humans, but it would not be the last. Captain Min-suk coordinated the chaos from his command ship, watching as his people turned their apparent disadvantages into weapons. Human ships were smaller and more fragile than alien vessels, but that made them faster and harder to hit. Human weapons were primitive compared to energy cannons, but nuclear warheads could still crack alien armor if delivered at point-blank range. Most importantly, humans fought with a desperation and creativity that the Vorthak had never encountered. Admiral Seo Jae-wook had studied every piece of information about alien military doctrine that the diplomatic mission had gathered. The Vorthak fought like machines, following rigid patterns and established procedures. They could not adapt to an enemy that refused to follow any rules. "All ships, execute pack formation Gamma," Min-suk ordered, as he watched 3 human vessels converge on an isolated Vorthak dreadnought. The alien ship found itself surrounded by enemies that coordinated their attacks with perfect timing. While one human ship distracted the dreadnought's main guns, another slipped under its firing arc to target the shield generators. The third ship came in from above, delivering torpedo strikes to the weakened sections. "Impossible," Zephulos breathed as he watched another of his ships suffer critical damage. "They are using pack-hunting tactics in space combat." His science officer looked up from her instruments with confusion. "Commander, pack hunting is a behavior pattern from primitive biological evolution. No civilized species employs such chaotic strategies." "Then these humans are not civilized," the commander growled. "Signal all ships to regroup and form defensive positions." But regrouping was easier ordered than accomplished. The human ships clung to their targets like parasites, never allowing the Vorthak vessels to break contact and reform their orderly battle lines. Every time an alien ship tried to retreat to safety, it found human fighters buzzing around it like angry insects. Lieutenant Commander Ju Min-woo led a squadron of converted civilian ships in the most audacious attack of the battle. His target was Zephulos' flagship itself, the massive dreadnought that served as the enemy's command center. "Remember," he transmitted to his pilots, "we are not trying to destroy it. We just need to get one person inside." Han Kyung-min had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. His small boarding craft was disguised as debris from a destroyed human ship. As the battle raged around the flagship, he drifted slowly toward its hangar bay, hidden among the wreckage of the fight. The Vorthak crew was too busy managing the chaotic battle to notice one more piece of floating metal. Han's craft slipped through their shields and landed silently in the enemy hangar. Within minutes, he was moving through the ship's corridors with fusion charges and a grim determination to hurt the invaders as much as possible. The explosion that followed destroyed the flagship's main computer core and killed Fleet Commander Zephulos. Without their command ship to coordinate their movements, the remaining Vorthak vessels found themselves fighting dozens of separate battles against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. "All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance," ordered the surviving Vorthak captain who had assumed command. "Signal Nexus Prime for reinforcements." As the alien fleet retreated beyond the orbit of Mars, Captain Min-suk surveyed the results of humanity's first space battle. They had lost 23 ships and over 1,000 brave souls. But they had also destroyed or disabled 60 Vorthak vessels. More importantly, they had proven that the Galactic Empire was not invincible. "Signal all human colonies," Minsuk ordered. "Broadcast this battle on all frequencies. Let everyone know that Earth stands free." The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than the official Vorthak reports. On 100 enslaved worlds, alien slaves working in mines and factories heard whispered rumors about the mammals who had fought the Empire and won. Some called it impossible. Others called it the begin. News of humanity's victory at Earth traveled through the galaxy's hidden networks faster than any official communication. In slave quarters and work camps across 100 worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives under Vorthak rule heard whispered stories about the mammals who had made the Empire bleed. For many, it was the first time they had heard the word freedom spoken aloud in generations. Dr. Park Sumin had been appointed Earth's first galactic ambassador after the battle, though her real job was far more dangerous than any diplomatic title suggested. Working from a hidden base on one of Saturn's moons, she coordinated with resistance movements that most people believed no longer existed. The first contact came from an unexpected source. A heavily encrypted signal reached Earth's monitoring stations, carrying a simple message in broken human language. "Mammals who fight Vorthak, Klaxi remember freedom, want help, will help." Translator Kim Bo-ram worked for 3 days to decode the full meaning of the transmission. The Klaxi, insect-like beings who served as laborers throughout the Empire, had maintained secret communication networks for thousands of years. Their hive-minded intelligence made them perfect for coordinating resistance activities, but they had never had allies strong enough to make rebellion possible. "They are offering to be our eyes and ears across the galaxy," Bo-ram explained to the Earth Command Council. "In exchange, they want us to help them liberate their breeding worlds." Colonel Lim Chan-woo studied the tactical information the Klaxi had provided. The insect beings worked in every major Vorthak facility, from weapons factories to command centers. They saw everything, heard everything, and remembered everything through their shared consciousness. "This changes the entire war," Chan-woo realized. "We would not be fighting blind anymore." The first joint operation took place at Zerion Minor, a barren world where the Vorthak kept millions of Klaxi eggs in underground incubation chambers. The plan was simple. Human ships would provide the military power, while Klaxi workers inside the facility would disable the defenses and guide the assault teams to their targets. Captain Jang Sung-ho led the attack force in his stealth ship Shadow Walker. The human vessels had been upgraded with new technology developed by engineer An Mi-ran, who had been working with freed Nereid refugees to combine their bioengineering knowledge with human innovation. "All ships, remember the mission parameters," Sung-ho transmitted as they approached the target world. "We are here to liberate, not to conquer. Every non-combatant we save is a victory." The Vorthak garrison at Zerion Minor had been reinforced after Earth's victory, but they still thought in terms of conventional warfare. They expected attacks from space or direct assaults on their fortified positions. They were not prepared for enemies who emerged from inside their own facilities. Kex Thara, the Klaxi worker who had first contacted Earth, led her people in the coordinated uprising. At precisely the moment human ships appeared in orbit, every Klaxi on the planet stopped working and began moving toward predetermined targets. Security systems failed as insect technicians rewired them, blast doors opened to admit human soldiers, and communication arrays broadcast surrender demands in a dozen languages. The battle was over in 6 hours. For the first time in galactic history, a Vorthak military installation had been captured intact by slaves working with outside allies. Even more importantly, 2 million Klaxi eggs were safely evacuated to ships provided by the growing human fleet. But the liberation of Zerion Minor was just the beginning. As word spread of the successful joint operation, other enslaved species began reaching out to the human Klaxi alliance. The aquatic Nereid offered their biotechnology in exchange for help freeing their people from the filtration facilities, where they were forced to live. The energy-based Luminar, who had been harvested for power for centuries, proposed a partnership that would revolutionize space travel. Engineer An Mi-ran worked with Nereid technician Splash of Silver Current to develop living ships that could heal themselves and adapt to enemy attacks. The biovessels grew from specially modified coral that could survive in space, creating hulls that were both stronger than metal and capable of evolution. "Look at this," Miran said excitedly as she showed the test results to Admiral C.O.J. Wook. "The bioships can actually learn from battle damage and develop resistances to whatever hurt them." Meanwhile, pilot Ryu Yun-hae was working with Luminar entities to perfect phase shift technology. The energy beings could merge with human ships temporarily, allowing them to pass through solid matter or become temporarily invisible to most sensors. "It feels like flying through a dream," Yun-hae reported after her first test flight. "The Luminar partner shares its consciousness with me during the phase shift. I can see space in ways human eyes were never meant to experience." The Liberation campaign gained momentum as more species joined the alliance. Colonel Chan Wu found himself commanding an army unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human marines fighting alongside Klaxi swarms, Nereid biohackers disrupting enemy systems, while Luminar entities provided impossible stealth capabilities. The Vorthak Empire responded with increasing brutality. Supreme Chancellor Vextar ordered the destruction of entire slave populations rather than risk them joining the rebellion. But for every atrocity the Empire committed, 10 more species quietly reached out to the liberation forces. The turning point came at the Battle of Meridian Station, a massive space fortress that controlled 3 important trade routes. The station was considered impregnable, protected by energy shields that could withstand the firepower of entire fleets and defended by automated weapon systems that never missed their targets. Commander Kang Dong-hyuk led the assault with a mixed fleet of human vessels, Klaxi swarm ships, and Nereid biocruisers. The battle plan was insane by conventional military standards. Instead of trying to break through the station's defenses, they would phase half their fleet inside the shields using Luminar technology. "All phase-capable ships prepare for synchronized transition," Dong-hyuk ordered as his forces approached the massive fortress. The Vorthak defenders watched in confusion as half the attacking fleet simply vanished from their sensors. Their advanced targeting systems could not lock onto ships that existed partially in normal space and partially in the energy dimension where the Luminar lived. When the phased ships materialized inside the station's shields, chaos erupted throughout the fortress. Human boarding parties stormed critical systems while Klaxi infiltrators swarmed through ventilation ducts to disable internal defenses. Nereid biohackers released viral programs that turned the station's own weapons against its Vorthak crew. The battle raged for 12 hours through the corridors and chambers of the massive station. In the end, the fortress fell not to superior firepower, but to the combined efforts of 4 different species working together with perfect coordination. Captain Moon Ji-won commanded the bioship Symbiosis during the final assault on the station's command center. Her vessel, a living combination of human engineering and Nereid biology, adapted to every weapon the defenders used against it. Energy beams were absorbed and redirected, explosive shells were healed around like wounds in flesh that closed themselves. Target. "The command throne," she ordered her Luminar partner as they phased through the command center's armored walls. The sight of Moon's ship materializing inside their most secure facility broke the Vorthak commander's will to resist. For 3,000 years, his species had believed their technology made them invincible. Watching enemies phase through solid walls and command living ships shattered that certainty. "I surrender," the Vorthak commander transmitted, his voice filled with disbelief. "How is any of this possible?" "Because we learned to work together," Moon replied simply. "Something your empire never understood." The fall of Meridian Station sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The liberation forces now controlled key trade routes and had proven they could capture any target no matter how well defended. More importantly, they had shown that cooperation between species could achieve things that no single race could accomplish alone. On Nexus Prime, Supreme Chancellor Vextar received reports of the defeat with growing rage. His advisors spoke of reinforcing defenses and building new weapons, but the Chancellor understood the real threat the liberation forces represented. "They are teaching the slaves to hope," he told his inner circle. "Hope is more dangerous than any weapon. If we do not crush this rebellion soon, it will spread until every world in the Empire burns with dreams of freedom." But across the galaxy, those dreams were already spreading. In hidden chambers and secret meetings, representatives from dozens of species spoke quietly about the day when they too might see their homeworlds free. The liberation forces had grown from a single human diplomatic mission to a galactic movement, and every victory made their cause stronger. Engineer Quan Hyo-jin, monitoring communications across the Empire, reported to Earth Command that resistance activity had increased by over 300% since the liberation of Meridian Station. Slave populations that had been passive for generations were beginning to organize and prepare for their own uprisings. The Vorthak are losing control, she concluded. Emperor Zalthuros had ruled the Vorthak Empire for 800 years, longer than any emperor before him. In all that time, he had never faced a real threat to his power. Rebellions were crushed, rivals were eliminated, and the natural order of Vorthak supremacy continued unchanged. Now, for the first time in his long life, he felt something he had not experienced since his youth: fear. The reports arriving at the Imperial Palace on SciFiPrime painted a picture of an empire under siege. 3 core worlds had fallen to the liberation forces, 27 military installations had been captured or destroyed, and slave uprisings were spreading faster than they could be contained. Worst of all, the rebels were no longer just fighting to free themselves. They were actively seeking to destroy the empire itself. "Summon the Grand Fleet," Zalthuros commanded his war council. "Every ship, every weapon, every soldier we possess. If these mammals want a war, they shall have one that will be remembered until the stars grow cold." Supreme Commander Lee Sang-min received the intelligence reports aboard the Liberation Fleet's flagship, the living biovessel Harmony, that had been grown specifically for the final campaign. Around him, beings from 12 different species worked together at stations designed by combined technologies no single race could have developed alone. "The Emperor himself is taking command of their response," reported Admiral Park Young-ju from her position at the tactical display. "Our Klaxi allies estimate he is bringing 10,000 ships to the battle." The numbers were staggering. Even with all their victories, the liberation forces could field barely 3,000 vessels against the Imperial Armada. By every conventional measure of military strength, they were about to be completely destroyed. Major Shin Hyun-woo studied the enemy formation data with the calm focus of someone who had learned to find opportunity in impossible situations. "They are bringing everything they have to one battle," he observed. "If we can win here, the war is over. And if we lose, everyone we have freed goes back to slavery," added Captain Moon Ji-won grimly. "Plus, Earth gets turned into a research laboratory." Lee Sang-min looked around at his diverse command staff: humans, Klaxi, Nereid, Luminar, and representatives from 8 other liberated species, all working together toward a common goal. The sight filled him with something that went beyond mere hope. It was certainty that they were fighting for something worth any sacrifice. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "We rendezvous at the Meridian Nebula in 6 standard hours. Every vessel that can carry weapons, every being who can fight. This is where we make our stand." The Meridian Nebula was a vast cloud of gas and dust that stretched across several light-years of space. It was perfect for the kind of unconventional warfare that had become the Liberation Force's specialty. Ships could hide in the dense clouds, sensors were disrupted by electromagnetic interference, and the complex gravitational fields made long-range targeting nearly impossible. Emperor Zalthuros arrived at the nebula aboard his personal dreadnought, Eternal Dominion, a ship the size of a small moon and armed with weapons that could shatter planets. The Imperial fleet deployed in perfect formation around him, a demonstration of Vorthak military precision that had conquered the galaxy. "Begin the cleansing," the Emperor commanded. "No prisoners, no mercy. These rebels have chosen extinction." The Imperial ships moved into the nebula like a wall of death, their sensors sweeping the gas clouds for any sign of enemy vessels. What they found was nothing: empty space where intelligence reports had placed the largest rebel fleet ever assembled. "Where are they?" demanded Fleet Admiral Korvex, Zalthuros's most trusted military commander. His answer came from every direction, at once as thousands of small craft emerged from the nebula's deepest regions. Human fighters and Klaxi swarm vessels had been hidden in the densest gas clouds, their life support systems modified to operate in the toxic environment. As the Imperial fleet searched for a main battle group that did not exist, they found themselves surrounded by an enemy that attacked from all sides simultaneously. Captain Jiang Sung-ho led his Ghost Squadron in the opening assault, their ships phasing in and out of normal space with the help of Luminar partners. They struck at the Imperial fleet's sensor arrays and communication systems, blinding and deafening the massive ships before vanishing back into the nebula's embrace. "Target unclear," reported a confused Vorthak gunner as he tried to track enemies that flickered between dimensions. "Weapons cannot achieve lock." The Imperial fleet's strength had always been its overwhelming firepower and impenetrable defenses. In the chaotic environment of the nebula, surrounded by enemies too small and fast to target effectively, those advantages became meaningless. Worse, the rebels were using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Sergeant Kim Tae-young led a boarding assault against the Imperial flagship itself, his team of human marines and Klaxi warriors transported by a Nereid bioship that could squeeze through spaces no mechanical vessel could navigate. They emerged from the ship's organic hull directly into the Eternal Dominion's reactor chamber, carrying fusion charges and the desperate courage of people fighting for their families' freedom. "For everyone who ever dreamed of seeing the stars as free beings," Kim transmitted as he activated the charges. The explosion that followed disabled the flagship's main weapons and sent shockwaves throughout the Imperial fleet. Emperor Zalthuros felt his great ship shudder around him and realized that his enemies had achieved the impossible. They had boarded the most heavily defended vessel in the galaxy and struck at its heart. In 800 years of rule, no one had ever come so close to killing him. "How?" he demanded of his surviving officers. "How do primitives breach our defenses?" "They are not fighting like primitives," Admiral Corvex replied with growing understanding. "They are fighting like a pack, using coordination and sacrifice in ways we never anticipated." The battle raged throughout the nebula as conventional military doctrine crumbled under the assault of an enemy that refused to follow any established rules. Human ships rammed Imperial dreadnoughts while their crews sang battle songs that spoke of homes they would never see again. Klaxi swarms overwhelmed enemy fighters through sheer numbers and perfect coordination. Nereid biovessels adapted to every weapon used against them, evolving defenses in real time. Dr. Kwon Hyo-jin, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, had prepared for this moment by studying everything humanity had learned about Vorthak, culture and mindset. As the battle reached its climax, she activated a galaxy-wide broadcast that targeted the fundamental weakness she had discovered in the Empire's ideology. "Soldiers of the Vorthak Empire," her voice carried across every communication channel, "look around you and see what your masters have built. An empire based on fear, where strength comes only from making others weak. You fight not for glory or honor, but to preserve a system that treats intelligence as slavery and cooperation as weakness." The broadcast continued as the battle raged, each word carefully chosen to exploit the psychological cracks in Vorthak society. "You call yourselves the master race, but you have never learned the greatest strength in the universe, the power that comes when free beings choose to stand together. Today, you face not just human ships or Klaxi swarms, but the united will of every species that refuses to kneel." The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the Imperial fleet, Vorthak soldiers began to question orders they had followed, without thought for centuries. Junior officers hesitated to fire on evacuation ships carrying liberated slaves. Entire crews began to surrender rather than die for an emperor who saw them as expendable tools. Admiral Park Young-ju coordinated the final assault from her flagship Soul's Vengeance, a hybrid vessel that combined human engineering, Klaxi coordination systems, and Nereid biotechnology. Around her, the Liberation Fleet pressed their attack with desperate intensity, knowing that this battle would determine the fate of the galaxy. "All ships converge on the Imperial flagship," she ordered. "We end this here and now." The assault on Eternal Dominion was led by Captain Oh Min-suk, the same officer who had commanded Earth's defenses during the first Vorthak attack. His ship had been destroyed and rebuilt 3 times during the war, but his determination had never wavered. Now he guided his vessel through the flagship's defensive fire with the skill of someone who had learned to make every shot count. This is for every being who died in your laboratories, he transmitted, as his ship's weapons found their target. This is for every child torn from their parents to serve your empire. This is for the dream of a galaxy where freedom means something. Emperor. Zalthuros watched his fleet disintegrate around him as ship after ship either surrendered or was destroyed by enemies he still could not fully comprehend. In his final moments, as human marines breached his command chamber, he looked into the eyes of Sergeant Kim Tae-young and saw something that terrified him more than death. The absolute certainty of someone fighting for something greater than themselves. "You cannot destroy the Empire," Zalthuros gasped as Kim's weapon found its mark. "Order will always triumph over chaos." "This is not chaos," Kim replied quietly. "This is justice." 6 months after the death of Emperor Zalthuros and the collapse of the Vorthak Empire, President Choi Min-jung stood before the first session of the reformed Galactic Assembly. The Great Chamber on Nexus Prime had been rebuilt to accommodate representatives from over 300 species, many of whom had never been allowed to speak for themselves in 3,000 years of imperial rule. The changes were visible everywhere. Where once Vorthak guards had patrolled with weapons and contempt, now beings from dozens of worlds worked together to maintain order through cooperation rather than fear. The enslaved races that had once scrubbed floors and filtered water now sat as equals among the representatives, their voices finally free to speak of their people's needs and dreams. "Friends, allies, fellow citizens of the galaxy," Choi began, her words translated instantly into hundreds of languages. "We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, but as free beings choosing to work together. The age of empire is ended. The age of cooperation has begun." The applause that followed came from creatures whose ancestors had never been permitted to make such sounds in this chamber. Galaxy representatives clicked their approval in perfect harmony. Nereid delegates created rippling patterns of light through their bioluminescent displays, and luminar entities pulsed with colors that conveyed emotions no solid being could fully understand. Director Yu Seung-wan had spent the past months working with rehabilitation committees to address the most difficult question facing the new galactic order: what to do with former oppressors. The Vorthak species numbered in the billions, and most had lived their entire lives believing their superiority was natural law. Simply destroying them would make the liberation forces no better than the empire they had fought to defeat. Justice without mercy becomes vengeance, Yu explained to the assembly. But mercy without justice becomes weakness. We must find a path that honors both the suffering of the oppressed and the possibility of redemption for the oppressors. The rehabilitation centers established on former Vorthak worlds were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Former Imperial. Soldiers worked alongside their former victims to rebuild damaged worlds, learning through shared labor that strength came from cooperation rather than domination. Takela, who had once served as a guard in the Emperor's personal force, now taught Vorthak children about the cultures their empire had tried to destroy. "I was taught that other species were inferior," Takala said during his testimony before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. "I believed it because I had never been allowed to know them as individuals. The humans showed us that intelligence takes many forms and that diversity makes us all stronger." Ambassador Hong Ji-min worked tirelessly to craft the Treaty of Nexus Prime, the founding document of the new galactic civilization. The treaty established fundamental principles that would govern relationships between species. No being could be enslaved or owned by another. Every species had the right to govern itself according to its own values, and conflicts would be resolved through dialogue and mutual understanding rather than force. "We are not creating a new empire," Hong explained to skeptics who worried about human dominance. "We are creating something that has never existed before, a truly voluntary association of free peoples." The military challenges of the new order fell to Admiral No Byung-hun, who commanded the Galactic Defense Force. Unlike the Imperial fleets that had once enforced Vorthak rule through fear, the GDF was designed as a peacekeeping organization that drew its strength from the willing cooperation of its members. Human tactical innovation combined with Galaxy coordination, Nereid biotechnology, and luminar energy manipulation to create military capabilities that no single species could achieve alone. But more importantly, the GDF existed to protect freedom rather than conquest. and its members served because they believed in the cause rather than because they were ordered to fight. "We are guardians, not conquerors," No told his mixed species officer corps during their first graduation ceremony. "Our mission is to ensure that no species ever again faces the choice between slavery and extinction." The greatest test of the new galactic order came when exploratory missions reached the edge of known space and encountered the Devourers, a machine intelligence that consumed entire star systems to fuel its expansion. The threat was unlike anything any species had faced individually, but the combined response demonstrated the true power of galactic cooperation. Captain Song Hye-jin commanded the first integrated exploration vessel, the starship Harmony's Dream, when it made contact with the machine entities at the galactic rim. Her crew included beings from 15 different species, each contributing unique capabilities to their mission. "Captain, we are detecting massive artificial structures around the star system ahead," reported Science Officer Kexathara, whose Klaxi analytical abilities had proven invaluable for understanding alien technology. "The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases," added Navigator Wave Dancer in Starlight, a Nereid whose bio-neural interfaces could process data patterns that electronic computers missed. When the Devourers attacked, it was not human weapons or Vorthak shields that saved Harmony's Dream. Instead, it was the perfect coordination between species that had learned to trust each other completely. Luminar entities provided phase shift capabilities that let the ship avoid the machine's weapons, while Klaxi computational networks analyzed the enemy's behavioral patterns to predict their attacks. The victory over the Devourers required the combined efforts of the entire galaxy. Human strategic planning, Vorthak industrial capacity, Klaxi coordination, Nereid biological adaptation, and Luminar energy manipulation all proved essential. More importantly, species that had been enemies for millennia worked together willingly because they understood that their survival depended on cooperation. On the colony world of New Hope, established jointly by several species in a system freed from imperial control, children played together in ways their parents had never been allowed to imagine. Teacher Kim Sun-hee watched human youngsters learning alongside Klaxi larvae, Nereid spawn, and even young Vorthak who were growing up without the supremacist indoctrination that had poisoned their species for so long. "What are you drawing?" she asked a human child named Lisa, who was working on a picture with her friend, a young Klaxi named Click of Joy. "It is our families working together to build a new home," Lisa replied, pointing to figures that represented different species cooperating on a construction project. Click of Joy added in the musical tones that characterized Klaxi communication, "My hive mind learns from her individual thoughts, and her individual mind learns from our collective knowledge. Together we understand things neither could discover alone." The transformation was not without challenges. Some Vorthak extremists attempted to restore the Empire through terrorism and sabotage. Certain human groups argued for Earth's dominance over the galaxy they had helped liberate. Economic disputes arose as former slave worlds demanded reparations from their oppressors. But for every problem that arose, the combined wisdom of hundreds of species found solutions that no single culture could have developed. Conflicts that might have led to war in the imperial era were resolved through mediation and compromise. The galaxy was learning to argue without fighting, to compete without destroying, and to grow without conquering. President Choi stood in her office on Earth. 5 years after the fall of the Empire, reading reports from across the galaxy. Trade between former enemies had increased by over 1,000%. Scientific cooperation had led to breakthroughs that were advancing every species' knowledge. Most importantly, no child anywhere in the galaxy was being born into slavery. "Madame." "President," her aide announced, "Ambassador Kim Tae-ho is here for your meeting." The same man, who had first stood before the Galactic Council as humanity's representative, now served as Earth's senior diplomat to the galactic community. His hair had grown gray during the war years, but his eyes held the satisfaction of someone who had lived to see his greatest hopes fulfilled. "The annual cooperation index is in," Tae-ho reported with a smile. "For the 5th consecutive year, interspecies collaboration has increased across all measured categories. We are not just maintaining the peace, we are building something better than anything that existed before." Outside the window, Earth's orbital shipyards worked around the clock to build vessels for the Galactic Defense Force and exploration missions to distant stars. But these were not the warships of empire or conquest. They were ships designed to protect freedom, to carry hope to distant worlds, and to ensure that no species would ever again face the darkness of oppression alone. The day humanity crushed. Galactic supremacy had not been about destroying the strong to elevate the weak. It had been about proving that strength shared willingly was infinitely more powerful than strength taken by force. In teaching the galaxy to hope, humanity had learned that their greatest victory was not in battle, but in building a civilization where every being could reach for the stars as a free individual. On worlds across the galaxy, in 1,000 different languages and through countless forms of expression, beings told stories of the day mammals from a small blue world had dared to challenge an empire and won.